Welcome to Lawyers Who Care, the video show podcast that highlights who go above and beyond for their clients. And on each episode, we will meet a new lawyer and they will share stories of when they went beyond legal counsel for the benefit of their client. My name is Andrew Samalin. I'm the principal of Samalin Wealth, a nationally recognized wealth management firm for lawyers, their firms, and their clients. And let's applaud lawyers who care and learn from them. Today, my guest is Howard Rosenblum. He is founder and chair of Deaf Equality. Howard has been licensed in Illinois as a lawyer for 33 years and is working to to achieve system change for the deaf and hard of hearing through litigation, policy changes, and consulting. Howard is deaf and will be using and uses sign language. And today we have Tony Brazzara as our interpreter today. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you, Andy, for having me on the show. And I think it's wonderful that you have a show who talks about attorneys who are dedicated to their field.
Of course. So, Howard, tell us what brought you to the law as maybe not as a child, but at what point did you choose this career path?
Actually, I was a child. My parents knew I was deaf since I was the age of 2. I had gotten sick through meningitis when I was 2 and lost all of my hearing. So my parents struggled with what can a deaf boy become in the future. But they believed I could do anything, so they really encouraged me to do anything I wanted to do, maybe suggested I become a lawyer. And so when I was 12 years old, I had a well-known deaf attorney here in America. There was only one attorney at that time. His name is Lowell Myers. And there was a TV movie made about him back in 1980. I was 12 at the time, and I met him. And he talked about his experience as a deaf attorney. And that was the first time that I realized that deaf people do anything they wanted. And he was my role model. It was a powerful position for deaf people to be, using the law to change the system, to change the world. And so since then, the age of 12, I've been obsessed with becoming an attorney.
So I'm almost thinking, there was some path created from Lowell, but I would also imagine that it wasn't a very well-trodden path at all. And so therefore, as you're going through the law school application process, through the study process, and law school itself, and by the way, this could be any school. It could be medical school. It could be business school, whatever it might be. How did you experience that as someone who's deaf?
Absolutely. You're absolutely correct. I was the first deaf person at my law school, Illinois Institute of Technology in Chicago, Kent. I was the first one that went through there. So both the school and I had to figure out how to navigate the process. I believe currently there's about 500 deaf attorneys in America, and almost all of us were probably the first in their law schools. Some attorneys have deaf students, so they are better now than I did 33 years ago. I think I was the 30th deaf attorney in America. Mm-hmm. And so I, had to find sign language interpreters who had the ability to learn all the terminology for law school in terms of the terms of art. And so we made up some signs because traditionally there's never been specific signs that were developed for those terms of art. Nowadays, Uh, we use captioning a lot so we can see the words so we know and understand what's happening. But in my time, that type of technology wasn't available. So I used sign language interpreters the entire way. And it was quite a learning experience for all of us.
So, what kind of roadblocks on a day-to-day basis were you faced with, and how did you overcome them?
Thinking about law school, everyone who's gone through that experience knows that there's a lot of Socratic approaches. And so it was hard to answer some of the questions in format with translation because it was very precise. You know, your wordings, that the words you chose when you responded to a question. And oftentimes with translation, word choices are, oftentimes get lost. And so that was one of the barriers I encountered. So oftentimes I had to practice with the sign language interpreter I was working with before class, before trial, or before anything we did to make sure that we were on the same page. And so word choices were the same, that we had scripts and they knew what I was going to say and sign. And so that was an additional layer of learning and practice and readiness that I had to have.
So, and this is interesting. I'm not a lawyer. I interface with lawyers constantly, every single day, either through wealth management or through a real estate deal or through any of the other uh, activities I'm involved in. I would imagine that you, Tony, as interpreter, given the fact that a comma can change a meaning, and the individual word can change the um, meaning or intent of a sentence or a paragraph. How is it, Howard, that you know that Tony or any other interpreter is getting that point across? And Tony, how do you feel the comfort of knowing that you're getting Howard's words and intent across in the manner that he intended?
There's a lot of faith. Deaf people work with interpreters often, and we're not 100% sure what they're saying, if it matches what we're signing, unless there is captions available. For example, on Zoom meetings or in court, there's typically transcripts or captioning. So then I know if what I'm signing is being conveyed correctly. Otherwise, it's just faith. And I understand that you asked the interpreter question, but normally in situations like this, the interpreters have an ethical duty not to engage and provide personal opinions. And so for this meeting, it's difficult for Tony. So Tony is serving in the role as of an interpreter during this engagement.
Of course, it's almost like if I needed to speak French and needed a French interpreter, although it's somewhat different. I guess it could be similar.
Yeah, it could be. There are differences with skill levels, abilities to match various individuals. So not all interpreters are created equally. And so each deaf person needs to filter out and choose an interpreter based on the situation.
Mm-hmm.
Some interpreters are great for court and legal, and then others are good for medical, or they have other specialties like theater or more dramatic type interpreting scenarios. So it's various interpreters have different skill sets.
And tell us how being deaf, Howard, informs or how you use that with your clients. Your clients engage you, and they engage you for a reason. tell us what the reason is and tell us how it affects and informs your casework.
Sure. Keep in mind that when I graduated law school, I also had a bachelor's degree in computer engineering. I had intended to go into the field of intellectual property law. Life has a way of telling you otherwise. And so I sought a job and I couldn't get hired. And so I think part of it was, do we want a deaf lawyer working for this firm? And so I faced that barrier, and many deaf attorneys face the same barrier. It just happened to be that my timing was right. I graduated law school in 1992, and that was the year that the Americans with Disabilities Act went into effect. And so the law firms that sought me out they wanted a lawyer with a disability to work with them so that they can advocate for people with disabilities. At that time, I wasn't really thinking that I wanted to work only with people who had disabilities, but that happened. That law passed, and there were more rights for those of us who had disabilities. So I went into that work. I worked with families that had children with disabilities. I worked with individuals who had disabilities across the gamut. And oftentimes, I had to show people who didn't have disabilities that I could do the work to overcome their doubts with a lawyer that has a disability. I had to prove myself that I could be successful, and I have been for 33 years. For the second half of my career, I focused only on deaf individuals. For the last 14 years, I worked specifically for deaf rights. First, for the National Association for the Deaf as their CEO and legal director, and currently as the chair and CEO of Deaf Equality. So my work is advocacy to advance accessibility for individuals who are deaf.
So since the ADA came out, let's assume that's the first inning. Where would you say we are in this game of 9 innings with regard to uh, rights of the disabled? Have we made much progress off of that? Are we still in the infancy? Are we largely structurally the way we should be? Or there is a long road ahead?
It's hard to say where it is because it's not forward moving always. Sometimes we take steps backwards. And so it's difficult to use a game analogy unless you want to count extra innings.
Fair.
But basically, in many ways, it's been an amazing transformation of accessibility for Americans in terms of physical and structural. There are many buildings now that have ramps, elevators, have different ways for people to open doors. People can access physically buildings, which is amazing because in the past there were many places that were inaccessible. With respect to communication access, oftentimes it's still an ongoing challenge. However, for example, I was involved with a lawsuit against Netflix. If you recall, at the beginning, Netflix would mail you those DVDs to your house in those red envelopes.
Mhm.
Those DVDs were about 80% captioned. So there were many people, deaf people, who could watch those movies. When they switched to streaming, 90% was not captioned.
Hmm.
So we approached Netflix and asked them if they could please add captions to their streaming services. They said that it would be too difficult with the technology and that it wasn't legally required. And so we went ahead and filed a lawsuit against them. We ended up winning. Right after we won, 100% of what they streamed was captioned. And we approached other streaming providers at that time. That was 2012. Hulu, Amazon, amongst others. And all of them complied. They all agreed to 100% captioning. And so that type of thing was a huge change. For example, though, with hospitals, it continues, they continue to deny sign language services or language access to deaf people, even though we are 33 years after the implementation of the ADA. So in some ways, it's been amazing progress, and then others, we're still stuck in the past. In terms of politics, I know it's a bad word, but many things in respect to enforcement of civil rights by the federal government, many of those enforcement agencies are currently are not staffed. And so that part of the process has stopped. And that's the reason why I'm going to continue with litigation. And additionally, I'm also running for Congress to see what I could do to restore that progress for the civil rights, especially for individuals with disabilities.
So let's talk about that Congress run. You're going to be running on a platform bound by, at least today, 2 political parties. But your focus transcends those parties. What else will you be running on? Because is your story going to resonate with everyone? Some people, it may not resonate at all. Some people will mean a great deal. Putting on your politician hat, how do you win your seat?
That is another part of the challenge. Running a campaign is already complex for anybody who's new to politics. Adding on that layer of the person running has a disability, the campaign itself is not accessible to most people with disabilities. And so I have to figure out what to do to have communication access for all of my campaign events. So that's been another barrier that I've had to overcome. Also trying to connect to the voters. That's a challenge for anybody with a disability. I do believe people get it. The need to ensure that America is accessible to everyone, regardless of your upbringing, your background, your religion, your disability, your national origin. We all deserve equal opportunities here in America. So that's been my platform. I want to ensure that all who feel marginalized feel included again.
Before we wrap up, Howard, if you could leave our listeners with one takeaway, what would it be?
Never disregard the opportunity that a person with a disability or any person who's marginalized can achieve success in America, because so many people doubt us. They think, oh, poor person with a disability, we need to help them. That's not the case. We do not want pity. We do not want charity. What we want is an opportunity. I grew up with many deaf individuals who have been extremely successful. One of my friends has won an Oscar, Marlene Matlin. Both of us had big dreams when we were young. And people doubted us. Look where she's at now. And look where I will be.
I'd like to thank my guest, Howard Rosenblum, founder and chair of Deaf Equality. And I'd like to thank you as well, Tony. Howard, can you provide our audience with your contact information?
Absolutely. You can find my organization, which is called Deaf Equality, at www.deafequality.com. I'm sorry, .org. In terms of my campaign, if you want to look at my platform and support me, the website is www.howardrosenblum, that's with a U at the end, .com. Thank you.
Wonderful. This has been the Lawyers Who Care video show podcast that highlights attorneys who go above and beyond for their clients. Howard is a perfect example. If you're an attorney or know one who does go above and beyond, feel free to reach out to us at 914-666-6600. Number again, 914-666-6600. Howard and Tony, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.